For years, investigators whispered a question that sounded impossible. How could a Macau crime boss move more money than Jeff Bezos during Amazon's early rise? The answer leads back to Wan Kuok-koi, better known as Broken Tooth, a name that once terrorized the streets of Macau, but later came to dominate the hidden financial arteries running beneath Hong Kong, Manila, and several offshore jurisdictions scattered across Southeast Asia. While the world was watching tech companies fight for market share, a parallel empire was quietly expanding, one built not on algorithms or logistics, but on VIP gambling rooms, junket syndicates, and flows of unreported cash that investigators estimate reached tens of billions of dollars per year, far surpassing Amazon's documented revenue between 1998 and 2003. What made Broken Tooth's ascent so extraordinary was not the violence that marked his early years with the 14K triad, but the moment he realized the real currency of Macau was not control of the streets. It was control of the money moving through its most exclusive casinos. Behind those closed doors, fortunes shifted in minutes. Debts were enforced without courts, and a shadow banking structure emerged that operated faster and more efficiently than any regulated financial system. Understanding how a man once imprisoned by Macau authorities returned to oversee a network that rivals multinational corporations requires peeling back layers of offshore operations, cross-border credit lines, and financial engineering hidden in plain sight. And it all begins with a single truth. In the right hands, a casino is not entertainment. It is a machine built to move the world's darkest money. When the story of Wan Kuok-koi begins, it does not start in boardrooms or offshore trust offices, but in the chaotic streets of 1980s Macau, a time when the struggle for power among the 14K triad, the Woshing Wo, and several emerging factions turned the tiny territory into one of the most dangerous corners of East Asia. What made Broken Tooth different from the other enforcers fighting for dominance was not just his ferocity, but his understanding that raw violence had limits. The true battlefield of Macau was shifting from alleyway confrontations to the gilded halls of its casinos, where a single wealthy gambler could move more cash in one night than an entire street crew could earn in a year. As Macau prepared for its handover to China in 1999, the territory became a magnet for wealthy players from Hong Kong, Guangzhou, Taiwan, and Singapore. And it was here that one first recognized the massive opportunity hidden behind the official casino floors. The junket system, a mechanism that quietly transported high-value gamblers into exclusive VIP rooms, extended them credit, and funneled enormous sums through channels beyond the reach of regulators. By the mid-1990s, investigators across Macau, Hong Kong, and Beijing believed that Wan was no longer simply a triad leader. He had become a gatekeeper to the VIP economy, a shadow figure whose influence allowed him to decide who could enter these lucrative rooms and who controlled the debt, credit, and collection networks that supported them. The significance of this shift cannot be overstated. A single VIP room could generate turnover between $1 billion and $3 billion per month, and those controlling access did not need to own the casino itself. They only needed to manage the people who brought the gamblers in and ensured the money kept flowing. One understood that money moved faster when it was invisible, and he began cultivating alliances with junket operators, casino intermediaries, and cross-border financiers who could transform the messy cash flow of gambling into clean, structured liquidity. Even as law enforcement in Macau intensified its crackdown, leading up to Wan's 1998 arrest, multiple intelligence reports suggested that he had already laid the groundwork for a financial network that could operate without him being physically present. This network relied on intermediaries in Hong Kong's underground banking sector, debt collectors in Guangdong, and trusted lieutenants who coordinated credit cycles across casinos in Macau and beyond. What began as a territorial power struggle had evolved into a sophisticated financial ecosystem that blurred the lines between triad activity and high-end casino economics. By the time Wan was sentenced in 1999 and served more than a decade behind bars, the VIP economy he once influenced had grown exponentially, creating conditions that would later allow him to re-enter the world not as a gangster but as a financier, an investor, and, according to multiple investigative agencies, an architect of a transnational money movement system. His transformation from street enforcer to financial strategist did not happen overnight. It was born from years of studying how wealth moved through Macau's casinos and how unregulated capital could be shaped into power more enduring than any triad hierarchy. What emerged was the blueprint for the shadow banking system he would later expand across Macau, Hong Kong, and Manila, a model that would ultimately become the foundation for the billion-dollar operations explored in the next chapter. By the time Wan Kuok-koi returned to the center of the narrative, the VIP gaming industry in Macau had grown into a force so powerful that even legitimate financial regulators struggled to quantify its impact. And understanding why requires looking at how the junket system operated beneath the casino lights. In the early 2000s, the world saw Macau becoming the new gambling capital of the world, surpassing Las Vegas in total revenue. But investigators knew the real story was unfolding behind closed doors inside private rooms, controlled not by casino executives, but by junket operators who maintained relationships with high-value gamblers across Hong Kong, Shenzhen, Guangzhou, Jakarta, and Taipei. These junkets functioned as unlicensed banks. They extended credit lines worth tens of millions of dollars, transported gamblers discreetly across borders, and ensured repayment through networks of collectors who operated outside traditional legal systems. For a man like Broken Tooth, who already understood the psychology of power and debt, the junket model was more than a business opportunity. It was the perfect architecture for a transnational financial engine. A single VIP room, according to archived reports from Macau's Gaming Inspection and Coordination Bureau, regularly generated monthly turnover between $1 billion and $3 billion, with some seasons pushing beyond $4 billion during holiday surges when wealthy players from mainland China flooded into Macau seeking anonymity and high-stakes action. What made these numbers extraordinary was that turnover, not profit, was the metric that mattered most to someone like Wan, because turnover indicated the speed and volume of money cycling through the system. High velocity meant more opportunities to extract fees, provide credit, and move cash across borders without triggering banking alerts. This is why investigators from Hong Kong's Independent Commission Against Corruption, Beijing's Ministry of Public Security, and later US, Treasury analysts believed that Wan's influence over junket operators gave him indirect control of a financial pipeline that dwarfed the early revenues of Amazon, which documented less than $1 billion in 1998, only reaching $5.3 billion by 2003. What Wan recognized was that the junket industry existed in a legal gray zone. Casinos depended on these operators to bring in wealthy clients, while governments lacked the tools to monitor the complex system of credit and offshore settlement that kept the rooms functioning. Junkets recruited their own teams of hosts, financial couriers, debt enforcers, and cross-border accountants, many of whom were connected to triads or underground banking groups in Fujian, Zhejiang, Hong Kong, and Malaysia. This allowed Wan to embed himself not as a visible leader, but as a silent force who shaped the movement of capital. Even during the years when Wan was imprisoned, intelligence files shared between Macau and Guangdong officials suggested that factions associated with his network maintained leverage over multiple junket rooms inside major casinos along the Macau Peninsula and the Cotai Strip, using intermediaries to negotiate credit arrangements and guarantee high roller traffic. When Wan was released in 2012, he stepped back into a system that bore his fingerprints, fragmented, decentralized, and ideal for someone who preferred influence over ownership. His understanding of how credit was created, how debts were securitized through personal guarantees, and how money could disappear into offshore accounts in Hong Kong, Philippines, Cambodia, and the British Virgin Islands allowed him to rebuild power faster than anyone expected. But what truly set him apart was how he leveraged the junket industry as a blueprint for a shadow financial infrastructure. Investigators later noted that Wan's network was capable of settling accounts across borders in less than 24 hours, bypassing traditional banking channels entirely through a mixture of underground banks, casino cage transfers, and discrete currency swaps executed by trusted intermediaries in Hong Kong's Chungking Mansions, Manila's Pasai district, and gambling hubs in Sihanoukville, Cambodia. These systems created what financial analysts now describe as a shadow liquidity loop, a mechanism capable of absorbing, moving, and redeploying massive sums with almost no traceable footprint. What began as a simple advantage in Macau's underworld evolved into a multi-billion-dollar engine that positioned Wan to expand further into the offshore markets explored in the next chapter, where the real scope of his cross-border operations began to take shape. As the influence of Wan Kuok-koi expanded beyond the walls of Macau's casinos, investigators in Hong Kong, Manila, and even Washington, D.C. began noticing a pattern. Enormous sums of cash generated inside VIP rooms were not staying in Macau. Instead, the money was slipping into a sophisticated offshore circuit that connected Macau, Hong Kong, and the Philippines, forming the backbone of a shadow banking structure that could move billions across borders faster than most legitimate financial institutions. To understand how one system operated, it is essential to start with Hong Kong, which functioned as the first major gateway in this network. The city's historic role as a trading and financial hub allowed underground bankers in areas like Mong Kok, Tsim Sha Tsui, and Shong Wan to blend illegal remittance operations with legitimate import-export companies. These hybrid entities handled cash settlements for junket clients who preferred anonymity, using coded ledgers, compartmentalized staff, and shell firms registered in the British Virgin Islands or Samoa. Funds that originated in Macau were often disguised as payments for electronics, seafood shipments, or construction materials, and then rerouted into accounts in Shenzhen, Guangzhou, and Xiamen before finally being pulled offshore. What made this structure so effective was its ability to convert gambling debt into clean cross-border liquidity within hours, something traditional banks subjected to KYC and AML rules could never replicate. But the real transformation came when Wan's network extended into Manila, a city whose casino boom in the mid-2010s created opportunities that rivaled those of Macau's golden age. When the Philippine Amusement and Gaming Corporation, PAGCOR, expanded licensing for integrated resorts like City of Dreams Manila, Solaire, and Okada Manila, junket operators from Macau flooded into the Philippine market, eager to exploit its looser oversight and its increasing acceptance of alternative payment channels. Philippine casinos permitted high-value transactions via remittance centers, private foreign exchange shops, and even crypto-based payment platforms, allowing funds to be settled through digital wallets or cryptocurrency mixers with minimal transparency. This environment proved ideal for the offshore mechanics that Wan had spent years perfecting. Cash collected in Macau would be moved discreetly to Hong Kong intermediaries, then wired into Manila ahead of a gambler's arrival, allowing them to play without carrying large sums physically. Once the gambler's session ended, the money, now washed as casino winnings or junket credit settlements, could be wired back to accounts in Singapore, Malaysia, or offshore nodes like Vanuatu or the Cayman Islands. Multiple intelligence reports from the US Treasury's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, FinCEN, suggested that at the height of this system, one-aligned operators oversaw transactions that easily exceeded $10 billion annually, with some analysts placing the figure well above that once Philippine online gambling, known as POGO, or Philippine Offshore Gaming Operations, entered the picture. POGO transformed Manila into one of Asia's most active centers for digital gambling, enabling thousands of Chinese clients to gamble online while funds moved through a labyrinth of crypto exchanges, prepaid cards, and underground banks. This industry alone generated an estimated $6 billion to $10 billion per year, and investigators repeatedly observed overlaps between POGO financing and the junket-style credit networks historically linked to triad groups. Another crucial arm of Wan's offshore ecosystem emerged in Cambodia, especially in Sihanoukville, where Chinese-run casinos multiplied rapidly from 2015 to 2019. These casinos served as holding points for cash, crypto, and assets converted through gambling chips, real estate purchases, or loan shark contracts. The presence of loosely regulated special economic zones, SEZs, in Cambodia made it easy for money to be layered and integrated into infrastructure projects, security companies, or tourism developments, another layer of obscurity shielding the flow of capital. What tied all these regions together, Macau, Hong Kong, Manila, and Cambodia, was the structural logic of one's shadow liquidity chain. Money never moved directly. It was mirrored, offset, substituted, or settled multilaterally across jurisdictions. A gambler's debt in Macau might be repaid by a business associate in Shenzhen, whose own obligations were cleared by funds arriving in Manila, which were in turn neutralized by an offshore wire from a company in Hong Kong. No single transfer revealed the whole picture, and each link was insulated by distance, decentralization, and carefully recruited intermediaries. By the time law enforcement agencies began piecing together this offshore web, the network had already evolved into something far more complex, laying the groundwork for the geopolitical version of one's empire, the transformation explored in the next chapter. When Wan Kuok-koi walked out of prison in 2012, many believed that the era of broken tooth had effectively ended, but investigators across Macau, Hong Kong, and the United States soon realized they had underestimated his ability to reinvent himself. Over a decade behind bars had not weakened his network. Instead, it had given him time to study how global capital moved, how governments responded to illicit finance, and how influence could be accumulated without leaving fingerprints. By the time he reappeared publicly, Wan was no longer presenting himself as a triad figure, but as a businessman, philanthropist, and leader of organizations that portrayed themselves as cultural or economic bridges between China and the wider Southeast Asian region. The most visible vehicle for this transformation was the World Hongmen History and Culture Association, an organization that Wan positioned as a cultural body, but which multiple intelligence agencies, including analysts from the US Treasury Department, would later describe as a potential platform for political influence, capital aggregation, and transnational coordination. Wan's activities began drawing attention in 2017 when he launched business agreements and investment deals across the Philippines, Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar, often promoting them as part of the spirit of China's Belt and Road Initiative, a branding choice that blurred the line between private enterprise and geopolitical ambition. In the Philippines, Wan publicly announced plans for a $500 million investment zone in Iligan City, claiming it would bring economic revitalization, jobs, and tourism. Local officials celebrated the idea, but financial analysts pointed out that the structure of the proposed zone resembled previous casino-linked real estate hubs, known for mixing legitimate development with high-risk financial networks. Meanwhile, in Cambodia, Wan's presence grew far more visible through partnerships with businessmen tied to the explosive casino boom of Sihanoukville, where Chinese capital, both clean and illicit, was flooding into more than 70 casinos, real estate ventures, and special economic zones. Investigators from FinCEN and Interpol noted that during these years, the number of Macau-linked money remittance networks operating in Cambodia surged, and several of these networks showed overlap with individuals publicly affiliated with Wan's business circles. What made his resurgence particularly striking was that he no longer needed to operate like a traditional kingpin. Instead of being physically present in casino backrooms or junket offices, Wan appeared at ribbon cuttings, cultural conferences, and economic summits, surrounded by businessmen, local officials, and advisors. The transformation was strategic. Legitimate fronts provided political protection, and political visibility provided legitimacy for cross-border financing activities. His network now included security companies registered in Cambodia, investment consultancies in Hong Kong, and development entities across the Philippines, several of which were tied to offshore accounts in jurisdictions like the British Virgin Islands or Vanuatu, allowing money to be quietly layered and cycled. The second phase of his rise also coincided with the meteoric expansion of POGO operations, Philippine offshore gaming operations, which by 2019 were estimated to generate $6 billion to $10 billion annually. Intelligence analysts observed that some operators in the POGO sector had historic ties to junket-linked credit networks, meaning the same financial skills one mastered in Macau were now being applied in digital gambling, crypto payment channels, and transnational debt enforcement. The ecosystem worked because it was decentralized. Hundreds of small entities, each moving a fraction of the total liquidity, but together forming a pipeline capable of absorbing and relocating billions in gambling flows, real estate investments, and remittance circuits. What made Wan's geopolitical pivot even more alarming to Western agencies was the way his organizations blurred the boundary between cultural association, private investment group, and influence network. In 2020, the U.S. Department of the Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control, OFAC, designated Wan under the Global Magnitsky Act, alleging that the World Hongmen Association was being used to advance criminal and political influence across Southeast Asia. The sanctions highlighted deals in Cambodia, business engagements in the Philippines, and connections to casino-linked economic zones, all consistent with the offshore structures previously observed by investigators. But even after sanctions, the flow of capital tied to his network did not disappear. Instead, it shifted into more obscure channels, routed through crypto exchanges in Manila, real estate investment firms in Sihanoukville, and shell companies registered under unrelated names in Hong Kong. By the time agencies tried to quantify his financial footprint, it was clear that Wan's second rise had evolved into something far more sophisticated than the gangster-to-businessman arc commonly portrayed in media. It was the construction of an economic machine that used geopolitics as cover, casino economies as engines, and cross-border finance as its bloodstream. And it is in this transformation that investigators found the answer to one of their most startling conclusions. The moment when Wan's money flows surpassed the revenues of tech giants, a comparison explored directly in the next chapter. The question that has long unsettled investigators across Macau, Hong Kong, Manila, and the United States is deceptively simple. At what point did the money flowing through Wan Kuok-koi's network exceed the revenue of Jeff Bezos' Amazon? To answer it, analysts reconstructed the financial environment of 1998-2003, the formative years of Amazon, when the company reported annual revenue ranging from $610 million in 1998 to $2.7 billion in 2002, and eventually $5.3 billion by 2003. These were impressive numbers for a young tech company, but they were dwarfed by the staggering turnover generated inside VIP rooms connected to Macau's junket networks, some of which investigators believe were influenced, either directly or indirectly, by figures aligned with Wan Kuok-koi. A single high-performing VIP room could generate monthly turnover of $1 billion to $3 billion, meaning annual volume easily reached $12 billion to $36 billion. And this figure represented only one room. During the late 1990s and early 2000s, Macau had dozens of such rooms operating simultaneously, and although not all were connected to one, reports from the Macau Gaming Inspection and Coordination Bureau, FinCEN, and intelligence exchanges between Hong Kong and Beijing suggested that Wan-linked intermediaries had influence over multiple junket operators at the peak of Macau's unregulated era. When analysts compare this system to Amazon's early earnings, the math becomes startling. Even if Wan's network touched only 10% of VIP turnover, a conservative estimate given the size of the junket economy, this still represented $1.2 billion to $3.6 billion annually, already placing him in the same revenue orbit as Amazon's early years. But investigators believe the real figure was significantly higher once offshore settlements, cross-border credit issuance, debt trading, and junket-side transactions were included. Intelligence assessments reviewed by US. Analysts concluded that the total liquidity cycling through one-aligned channels likely reached or exceeded $10 billion per year, with some periods, especially between 2015 and 2019 during the explosion of POGO gambling in the Philippines, pushing that figure past $20 billion. To regulators, the comparison was not about profit, but about cash velocity. Amazon generated revenue through sales recorded under US accounting laws. Wan's network moved gambling-derived liquidity through underground banks, foreign exchange shops, crypto rails, Philippines-based online gambling hubs, and real estate holdings in Cambodia, Macau, and Hong Kong, allowing money to move at speeds corporate entities could not match. A gambler could lose $10 million in Macau on a Friday night, have their debt settled in Shenzhen by Saturday morning, and see the funds reappear as investment capital in Manila by Monday afternoon, all without a single international wire recorded. This type of financial engineering created what analysts called a shadow liquidity engine, a structure capable not only of moving money faster than Amazon could generate it, but of generating revenue-like flows independent of legal or tax constraints. By the mid-2010s, when POGO operations in the Philippines were generating an estimated $6 billion to $10 billion annually, and when junket-linked casinos in Sihanoukville, Cambodia, were handling volumes that dwarfed the local economy, multiple intelligence units concluded that Wan's transnational footprint had evolved into something larger than any one city or sector. It resembled a dispersed financial organism, part gambling network, part underground bank, part offshore investment platform, capable of absorbing and redirecting capital on a scale that rivaled multinational corporations. The most telling detail emerged in the 2020 OFAC sanctions, which cited Wan for operating a network that posed a threat to global financial integrity and maintained activities across Cambodia, Philippines, Hong Kong, and beyond. While the sanctions avoided giving precise numbers, investigators who contributed to the assessment later acknowledged that the liquidity flows they tracked were consistent with multi-billion-dollar operations, large enough to compete with the revenues of some of the world's most influential companies during their early expansion years. What makes this comparison so striking is not simply the size of the money, but the nature of it. Amazon's revenue was visible. Wan's was engineered to remain hidden. Amazon processed customer payments. Wan processed fear, credit, and debt. Amazon moved goods. Wan moved liquidity. And in a financial landscape where speed, secrecy, and flexibility determine power, it is not difficult to understand why analysts concluded that, at key moments across the last 3 decades, Broken Tooth's shadow empire was circulating more money annually than one of the most iconic companies in the history of global commerce. Which leads to the real question, the one that investigators still debate today. If this much money moved through his network in the past, how much of it is still circulating in the shadows now? The answer lies in the closing chapter. In the end, the story of Wan Kuok-koi, the man the world knows as Broken Tooth, is not a tale defined by street violence or triad mythology, but by the staggering scale of a financial universe built far from public view. What began in the neon shadows of Macau expanded into an offshore matrix linking Hong Kong, Manila, Cambodia, and countless jurisdictions where billions moved with no signatures, no audits, and no paper trails. Investigators from the United States, China, and Southeast Asia reached the same astonishing conclusion. The liquidity passing through his networks, whether from VIP rooms, junket credit cycles, POGO operations, or cross-border remittance chains, often reached volumes larger than the early annual revenues of Amazon. A comparison that forces us to confront how power operates when money flows faster than laws can track it. But the true legacy of this empire lies not in the billions themselves, it lies in the blueprint it left behind. The financial circuits Wan helped shape still exist, fragmented, decentralized, and embedded in everything from crypto-driven gambling hubs to the special economic zones that dot Sihanoukville, Manila, and the Pearl River Delta. Each node continues to operate with the same speed, secrecy, and sovereign-proof structure that made his network so difficult to dismantle. And that leads to the question investigators still cannot answer. If a man once imprisoned by Macau authorities could return to influence billions moving across Asia, how many others now command similar networks while remaining completely invisible? As global regulators scramble to catch up, one truth has become impossible to ignore. Broken Tooth's empire may have started in the past, but the financial shadows it created still stretch across the present.